Astonishing Legends Network.
If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. You can call or text 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org in the U.S. and Canada. This service is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, providing support from certified crisis response professionals. For those outside North America, please contact your local emergency services or a regional crisis center immediately. Thanks to our sponsors and Patreon supporters, Astonishing Legends is free to listen to. We appreciate your support of them and us.
On the morning of February 27, 2026, a man prepares to leave his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But he isn't packing a suitcase, and he isn't getting into his car. Instead, he is systematically, almost clinically, severing all of his connections to the modern world. He unclasps his smartwatch and leaves it behind. He even takes off his prescription glasses. When he finally walks out the front door, the details get muddy, as they always do in the first few hours of a panic. Some sources claim he left his wallet behind, others say he took it. But we do know he took a .38 caliber revolver, and reports indicate he may have been carrying a red backpack. He wasn't just wandering, he was prepared. If this were an ordinary man, it would simply be a tragic local mystery, a silver alert broadcast across local highways. But his family quickly made one thing clear. He was not suffering from dementia. He was not confused or disoriented. This was a deliberate, lucid departure. And this is William Neil McCaslind, a retired Air Force Major General and the former commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory. His brain holds the operational blueprints for America's most advanced nuclear deterrence, hypersonic delivery systems, and the invisible electromagnetic battlefields of the future. He's a man who knows exactly how the world could end. When a human asset carrying the keys to the apocalypse actively goes off-grid and vanishes, the intelligence community quietly panics. But when his disappearance is just one piece of a rapidly expanding puzzle, segments of the public can panic. In the span of a few months, the internet has watched and reacted as a terrifying pattern seems to have emerged. A top-tier administrator at Los Alamos factory resets both of her phones and walks away from her house. A NASA JPL director disappears without a trace on a hike. A Caltech astrophysicist is gunned down on his own porch. In total, a list of 10 or 12 highly cleared defense and nuclear scientists have vanished, died, or been murdered. For armchair sleuths and conspiracy theorists, the conclusion is obvious. An invisible, highly trained hit squad is scrubbing the American scientific community. Is it domestic or foreign? Others look at the erased digital footprints and see the darkest kind of espionage, the clandestine extraction of compromised assets. They ask the terrifying hypothetical: what if someone was secretly blackmailed or their loyalties turned, and a foreign adversary is quietly pulling them off the chessboard before they can be caught? Tonight, we're going to look at the evidence, at least as far as we can find it, through the clinical lens of counterintelligence. Are we watching a covert war play out in our own backyards? Or are we watching human minds breaking down under the pressure of scientific and militaristic isolation? Does it have to be a singular answer? Perhaps not.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
Secrecy is the first essential in affairs of state. Cardinal Richelieu, 17th century French chief minister to King Louis XIII, an early architect of state espionage, from his 1641 Testament Politique.
Join us tonight for a special look into the evolving story of the scientists mysteriously vanishing from the ranks of U.S. military research.
And we're back.
That we are, folks. We're back. And I don't know what they're saying out there in the rest of the world, but on Patreon, people are like, "Oh, we missed that." So
Really?
Yeah, they said, "Oh, I did miss it. We want you to keep saying it." At least, 2 or 3 people.
Maybe we're giving them a coupon discount on Patreon for
there you go.
endorsing that. No, I have no emotional stock in that anyway. But I do already off the bat have a correction from last time. Which
from last week.
I think I may have misspoke.
By the way, we caught this. We just decided to let it go out anyway. We haven't gotten any emails yet, but I'm sure they're bound to come in.
Oh, let's consider it an Easter egg then. It's that. It's like when the master rug crafters of the Middle East would. They leave in an imperfection in the rug so as not to affront the perfection of God.
God knows that all episodes of Astonishing Legend are perfect except for last week. So,
but our mistake, or mine, was talking about getting too close, as Rob K. often said, don't lick the UFO. People who did get too close or had an interaction. And the 2 famous cases here, one, it was Joe Simonton who claimed that he was offered space pancakes as an offering of food, which, it sounds funny. And then as I did more research or heard more things and read more things from that years ago, there are theories that it may have been some type of manna, the substance, from biblical times and mentioned in the Bible, as a substance that is created out of the atmosphere with a little help in a machine. In fact, there's a book called The Manna Machine.
Protein shake.
Yeah, it kind of it keeps you alive, and I think in the Bible it's described as something like a fog or a mist of some kind had settled over the Israelites when they were camping out in the desert for 40 years, and as it dried, they learned that they could eat it, and it sustained them. And so I think there's a book even called The Manna Machine, and that maybe that's extraterrestrial type of technology. So that is one. I know it sounds far afield and another tangent of mine, but there is some connection to that. And the other guy, though, he was out hunting as well, I think, but he walked up, and that was Steve Michalak.
Yes.
Was that in Canada, I think?
Falcon Lake, Winnipeg.
There you go. Yeah, Winnipeg. That's right, Falcon Lake. And he walked up close to it. And I think what the thread we were talking about is that sometimes people are unintentionally injured when interacting. As a kid, I walked up to my dad's motorcycle, and I thought the texture of the exhaust pipe looked kind of cool because it was black. And I touched it, and I got burned. Well, that was my fault. Okay, that's like a kid. And my dad was like, "You okay?" But I tried to hide it. He's like, "Your hand okay?" And I felt embarrassed. Like, I touched the tailpipe. I was like, don't do that. So that's the lesson there. Like, I walked up to the UFO. I was like, don't do that. Yeah. But he had a burn pattern that he claimed it shot out a jet of exhaust and burned circles into his chest, which there are photos of.
It looks like a waffle iron, kind of.
Yeah, big circles. And so the exhaust or whatever burned him. And I think he also got sick. So there was effects to that nature. And then as we were talking about last episode with the masks and the lead masks of Vietnam Hill, there could be an unintentional injury. And as we said in the cold open part from the quote, they thought perhaps that there was a great cyclone that was going to destroy the earth, and they were actively, maybe that was connected to what they told their friend. And so again, that's that false information or slipstreamed information where it's like, not in this timeline. Maybe something else. But in all cases here, so that was something I wanted to clear up for our UFO buffs out in the field. And just to make that distinction. And in my defense, I think Joe Simonton also said the pancakes tasted terrible and may have been burnt a little.
Oh, there you go. You got the burned parts. Yeah, you crossed up your...
There you go. I'm glad we cleared that up. It was super important.
A little precursor here tonight, folks. Usually we stay away from topical events such as the subject of tonight's show. We prefer mysteries with a few decades of dust on them most of the time. Also, we're pretty much a apolitical show, as you no doubt know if you've been listening to us for a while, and as much as we can be. But this specific story about missing defense and nuclear scientists is blowing up across the internet and the news right now, and we just felt like we couldn't ignore it, and it was something that people would be interested in. It directly touches on a theme a lot of you guys are deeply invested in, and something we've dedicated several episodes to in the past: disclosure. We aren't here to push an agenda or tell you how to feel about government institutions. Our goal tonight is to present everything we could run down after some cursory research with strict objectivity. That said, we're still going to get into the fringy stuff, but we're going to break down the timeline of these recent cases and connect them to verified historical precedents so you can draw comparisons to the past yourself. We'll lay out the data that we found, provide some historical context because we came across some interesting things from the past that a lot of people I don't think are talking about in relation to what's happening now, and then step back and let you decide what might actually be happening. But before we jump in, we wanted to explicitly state these are real people with families who are actively and desperately still looking for answers in many cases. So we don't know definitively what happened to them, and any motivations or theories we discuss tonight are strictly speculative.
Yes, ditto on what Scott said. And as you folks know us and know us well, we try to be very respectful to the families because what's known, whether the details are true or not, or more information comes out, is that, yeah, these are tragedies in every case. Whether somebody had just simply died from natural causes or disease, these are deaths that we're talking about, and people with families and friends and folks that love them and coworkers. So we want to be very respectful and not too sensational. But as Scott also said, there's been a lot of chatter about this, especially in our Facebook group. People wondering if we were going to cover it. And we're just as curious and interested too, because that's the heart of the show. This could be nothing. This could be something. We're going to talk about that. But either way.
Or a combination.
Exactly. And either, in any case, we want to know what's going on, just as you do.
Yeah.
So as this story is evolving moment to moment, parts of it were easy to find details on. In an interesting psychological twist in my own, there's some topics that I'm hesitant to cover because there are so many aspects and news, especially with our news cycles these days. It's kind of like the drones over New Jersey, and then it's other states. It's like, do we have to mention them all? Are we getting all the facts right? Have we scraped all the stories that are out there and all the testimonies of people, all of the opinions versus the facts and the chaff from the wheat and all that? And I want to cover it. And it's like, it's too monumental. I can't even get into that. I can barely follow it myself. In this case, other parts about the details, sure. Others, not so much. There's no way to cover this without some speculation in those thinner areas. But speculate we will, because that's also what we're good at. Just data out of our rears.
Yeah, informed speculation.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good way to put it, sure. Well, indeed to all that, sir. So what's our jumping off point here?
Let's start the timeline in July of 2023, just a few years ago in this case, with Michael David Hicks. He worked as a research scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, for 24 years before passing away at his home in Los Angeles County. Now, the coroner listed arteriosclerotic cardiovascular disease as the cause. He didn't vanish, he didn't go missing, but armchair sleuths on the internet immediately flagged the fact that there was a lack of a publicized autopsy. That seeds the foundation for a much darker narrative. And by 2025, people online started clustering his isolated death with a string of actual disappearances involving prominent nuclear researchers. And just one thing that I want to point out here is in the course of researching this, and it's kind of a duh, but like when somebody works in a highly technical field like that might be related to defense, it's pretty normal not to publicize the autopsy because you just got to make sure that things are the way they are. But on the other hand, that allows for a cover-up if there was going to be one. But there's nothing weird about the fact that it wasn't publicized.
Right. I understand that. And a thought on that, in that, yes, I've had relatives and recently, if it's natural causes, often there isn't an autopsy performed because it takes a lot of work and resources. But if something happens, and it could be the slightest thing, like the patient at hospice falls out of bed, hits their head, then yeah, that sparks an autopsy because they want to know, was there negligence involved? What did this person actually die of? So little things like that, which are mundane and they happen often, but it can seem suspicious or not. But I will point out one thing here, and in these cases, the devil is in the details, perhaps literally. And what you find out is that small little details with these put a twist on it and a more of a case in point. We often talk about one of the best natural psychics and remote viewers, Pat Price.
I don't care if people don't like remote viewing. There's going to be a Pat Price episode. I am so intrigued with that guy. He's my favorite thing we learned in all of remote viewing. So aside from how to amateur remote view, that was my second favorite.
Right. Well, again, because when you do it yourself, then you get it, and you have to do it to kind of get it. And with Pat, he had a natural ability, but his ending is just as mysterious as the process he worked on and the mechanics of how that all worked. Because, yes, he was an older gentleman. He had some heart problems that were known, but he wasn't that old and he wasn't that sick, seemingly. But he was in a Las Vegas hotel room and he died of a heart condition. And the strange thing is that, yes, there was no autopsy, again, perhaps because it was a known condition. But the odd little detail that throws a wrench in that is that no autopsy, and he was cremated before his wife was even notified.
But he also was working on defense secrets.
He was, but so there's a big debate like, well, who did that? Well, could be a foreign adversary.
Right.
And the idea is that what they do is that they find a condition in your medical records that you have already, and then they unalive you with that, so there's no suspicion. Well, there you go. He had heart problems, or he had a heart condition. He's taking a spironolactone, whatever it is, and then you die of that. And it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Except the fact that, yes, but here's the thing. I do believe with the clandestine services, they do notify your wife or spouse right away. They may not say what, but because that's a family wish, right?
Yeah.
So he's passed. He's not going to divulge any more secrets. The manner of death is pretty normal. Why did they then, without her permission or knowledge, before she even knew he was dead, cremate him? So things like that will curious.
Yeah.
You do wonder, but then, Uri Geller in the fantastic documentary Third Eye Spies talks a little bit about these kinds of things and does this kind of thing happen? You know, his opinion is like, well, he's the goose that lays the golden eggs. You don't want to off him because he's a fountain of knowledge that is not easy to get.
That's the other question. Was he even dead?
Yeah. So like I said, these kind of things spark all these kinds of thoughts and more red yarn on your corkboard and more rabbit holes. But getting back to this timeline here, which is important, and again, we'll have more thoughts about when does the timeline start? Is that important? Well, in 2025, there is a noticeable spike. In May of last year, a former Los Alamos National Laboratory employee walks out of his New Mexico home and vanishes. A lot of Southwest stuff going on around lately.
Yeah. Well, that's where all the research is.
And then a month later, Monica Resza, one of the most high-profile cases, and NASA JPL's Director of Materials Processing, disappears while hiking in the Angeles National Forest. By the way, that's my number one on the weird meter.
Yeah, that one is super strange.
Okay.
It's very intriguing. And then 4 days after that, Melissa Cassius, an admin worker with top-level security clearance at Los Alamos, walks away from her house and doesn't come back.
Right.
Then in August, Stephen Garcia, a government contractor at the Kansas City National Security Campus in Albuquerque, walks away from his home carrying a handgun.
Another one. Okay, now if we set aside Hicks dying at home and Resza getting lost in a national forest, it turns out there's a highly specific pattern to these other disappearances. If you want to label it, you might call it the vanishing on foot pattern. 4 people, Chavez, Cassius, Garcia, and eventually General Mccasland, appear to have simply left their homes on foot and walked off the map. Now, based on the scenes left behind, they allegedly abandoned their cars and their keys. And it mirrors what investigators in the intelligence community call the impossible scene, where an extraction or a death is engineered to leave zero forensic trace.
Yeah, so an impossible scene, I had to look this up, it's pretty fascinating, is essentially a forensic paradox. It's a physical environment that logically contradicts the sequence of events that supposedly happened.
Yeah, I think it could be the opposite of the orgy of evidence. Have you heard that? I don't know if that's a specific term, but if you want to see a good example of that, in Spielberg's Minority Report, which is based on a Philip K. Dick story, Tom Cruise comes across a hotel room and there's an orgy of evidence, and you could picture it, right? So there's a briefcase or suitcase and there's all these photos and news clippings, and it all points to somebody being super obsessed with whatever crime they're committing or something. And that's the orgy of evidence everywhere. And I believe Colin Farrell, the one who's chasing Tom Cruise, says, this is an orgy of evidence. You know how often we find that in the FBI? Never. Because it's too fake. Nobody does that. that's a movie thing. That's not a real life thing where it's like, oh, I left up the cork board with all the red yarn tying everything together. So when the investigators come, they can see exactly what I was thinking about. That rarely happens, although there is evidence left behind. And so the idea, though, is that it throws you off the case and supposedly trying to throw the investigators off the case. Well, there you go. He's obsessed about this. Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle of Sherlock Holmes fame was excellent with these. Classic Sherlock Holmes is basically built on the impossible scene.
Yeah, every time.
Yeah, think about it was like The Adventure of the Speckled Band.
Oh yeah, that's one of the heavy hitters in his catalog, right?
Yeah, one of his most famous, although it's not probably the most famous title, of course. Hand of the Baskervilles and some others were, I think, more known.
But you know the story.
Yeah,
you know the story.
Yeah, originally published in The Strand magazine back in 1892. And Conan Doyle actually went on record listing it as his personal favorite Holmes story. I wasn't aware of that till we looked into it.
Yeah.
The other thing is that for paranormal and now criminal and possibly UFOs, we talk a lot, strangely, about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. For some guys back at the end of the 19th century. The setup here is exactly what you described. You've got a dead victim that's in a bedroom locked from the inside, with no trace of a weapon or an intruder. I'm not going to spoil the story as much as Scott would love me to give a spoiler alert on a 100-year-old mystery. But okay, 134 years ago. Yeah, sorry. But in the real world of counterintelligence, a highly trained assassin with support and a well-thought-out plan would be required. You just don't stumble into an impossible scene by accident.
Yeah, I mean, Jason Bourne makes it look easy, but it's not reality. Or if it is, the number of people with this skill set is statistically insignificant. And moving them around and getting away with it is increasingly difficult in today's world of digital eyes and ears literally everywhere.
What's funny is that you hear writers and it's like, if you're writing a period piece or you actually were in the period writing, you could get away with a lot more and had to be more clever. Now you have to be clever in a different way because there are so many eyes and ears. But also I notice like writers who do stories and it's like, man, you know what would have solved this whole thing? A cell phone. If a character could just be able to communicate. Same thing with the Zodiac Killer. If the interagencies had been able to just fax each other better or communicate, that probably would have been solved.
You'll sometimes hear us talk about how important it is to you and your family to have quality life insurance that fits your budget and is backed by a company you trust to pay out when needed. But what if you say you already have life insurance? Well, that's a good start. But when's the last time you checked how much you're paying versus how much coverage you're actually getting? I bet the answer is not since I first signed up for it. And chances are you're paying way too much for too little.
Yeah, and what if you're getting your life insurance policy through your work? Well, did you know that if you get laid off or lose your job, you'll probably lose your coverage too if you don't take matters into your own hands? Well, that happened to a relative of mine. They didn't think to check on it when they changed jobs, like most of us don't. The policy lapsed, years went by, and when it was needed, the insurance wasn't there, and it was too late.
That's sad, and also unsettling to think about. But thankfully, with SelectQuote, it's oh so easy to fix.
Yeah, it really is. I've used SelectQuote, and that ease of use and the peace of mind you get with them on your side, not to mention their excellent customer service, is why I love them, and I think you will too.
Well, over 2 million Americans seem to love them too, because SelectQuote has secured them over $700 billion in coverage, and they've been around for over 40 years, making them one of the most trusted brokers in insurance. I think SelectQuote has been so successful for so long because they have one mission: to find you the right insurance policy for your unique needs.
And if you get on the phone with them, you really feel like their licensed agents are working for you, unlike those one-size-fits-all life insurance companies. In as little as 15 minutes, they'll compare policies from top-rated carriers to find you the best fit for your health and your budget. And they work for you for free.
Ooh, that's a lot of yous and yours there.
That is a you. It's all about you. That's the point. It's all about you.
That's the point. Yeah. And don't worry if you think you're not in the best of health, because there's no medical exam necessary. They partner with providers offering same-day coverage up to $2 million without needing to visit your doctor.
Which is a relief, because so many folks I know in my demographic have some health issue going on. And whether it's high blood pressure, diabetes, or heart disease, etc., SelectQuote has partners with policies designed for many pre-existing health conditions, so you get the protection you deserve.
Head to selectquote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget.
Yeah, life insurance is never cheaper than it is today. SelectQuote. They shop, you save.
Get the right life insurance for you for less and save more than 50% at selectquote.com/AL.
One more time, save more than 50% on term life insurance at selectquote.com/AL today to get started.
That's selectquote.com/AL.
Sometimes it feels like we're operating in a temporal distortion when we do these deep dives. I mean, the hours just kind of slip away.
I know, and here I was thinking tonight's topic wouldn't have enough there, but like all rabbit holes, it turned out to be deeper than I thought it would.
Well, it turns out to be more than just tabloid fodder.
Oh, man. Well, on these long nights, that's exactly when the hunger strikes. You're exhausted, and making a healthy meal feels impossible. It's not a willpower problem, it's a setup problem. Until we found Factor.
Oh, so true. You know, there's something healthy in your fridge that you should be making, but you just don't have it in you.
Exactly. With Factor, I'm hitting my nutrition goals this season without the planning, grocery runs, or cooking. They solve the setup problem with fully prepared meals, designed by dietitians and crafted by chefs, delivered right to your door.
Yeah, it really is the perfect solution because they're ready in 2 minutes, and we're talking fresh, never frozen. Plus, they ban over 175 ingredients, so no artificial colors or sweeteners, no high fructose corn syrup, and no refined seed oils. Just nutrient-dense food.
And they have meals built around your goals, whether that's weight loss, overall nutrition, more protein, or GLP-1 support. Or for strength and workout recovery, check out Factor's Muscle Pro collection.
Well, I just let them surprise me with their over 100 rotating weekly meals. You can even try the newly launched ready-to-eat salads with vibrant ingredients like elote corn and miso edamame.
Well, we love Factor, and we think you will too. Factor shops, preps, cooks, and delivers straight to your door, so you have more time for everything you love this spring.
Head to factormeals.com/AL50OFF, that's 50, and use code AL50OFF to get 50% off and free daily greens per box with new subscription only, while supplies last until September 27th, 2026.
I'm Becca in Fort Worth, Texas, and when I'm not catching up on old episodes of Astonishing Legends, I'm listening to new episodes of Astonishing Legends. Now let's get back to Astonishing Legends.
All right, now getting back into the timeline of events here, something you may or may not have heard of, even if you're casually interested in this. If you look at the 2010 death of Gareth Williams, you might understand why people online immediately jump to clandestine extractions when someone like Neil McCaslind goes missing. Now, Gareth Williams was a Welsh mathematical genius and a codebreaker for GCHQ. And for those of us here in the States who might not know, that stands for the Government Communications Headquarters. It is the British equivalent of the NSA. And they handle cryptography and signals intelligence. And at the time of his death, he was on what MI6 would call secondment, which sounds like a French derivation here, which basically means he was temporarily loaned out or reassigned from his home agency. So you have a top-tier codebreaker temporarily working for their equivalent of the CIA, and he was operating at the highest levels of international espionage. And investigators found his naked body stuffed inside a red North Face duffel bag in the bathtub of his London flat. Now that you may remember, that was very odd.
It was famous. Yeah, that story
It became
made
famous,
world news.
but like I said, me just reading all that before that, you may not have known. It's just like a guy was found inside a duffel bag, suitcase.
Yeah, and why is it padlocked?
In the bathtub. And then now I'm thinking what the witty, pithy quip would be from Gary Oldman as Jackson Lamb in Slow Horses would be about that.
Preceded by a fart.
Yeah. Yeah, and punctuated at the end, of course.
Yes.
So yeah, that may have triggered your memory about it. Very strange detail, but that's the truth. And the duffel bag was left in the bathtub in his London apartment. Someone had padlocked the bag from the outside, so he didn't do it.
Right.
The keys were found inside the bag underneath the body. And the heat in the apartment was turned on full blast in the middle of August. And you can imagine why. The coroner ruled he was unlawfully killed, suggesting a third party had locked him in. And then years later, the Metropolitan Police, tried to float the idea that it was a tragic accident and that he locked himself inside.
Yeah, so 2 experts tried 400 times to lock themselves inside an identical bag, and it didn't work. This is the absolute gold standard for a high strangeness death in the intelligence community.
Yeah, and the ultimate epitome of ridiculous answers that we get for when something like that happens. At least they didn't say flares or cranes.
Yes.
Or now, what's the new one? It's drones. Yeah, so something like that. Anyway, well, when people see Neil McCaslind or Melissa Cassius walk out the door and then vanish these days, they immediately project that Gareth Williams level of espionage onto them, those cases. They assume a highly trained hit squad just scrubbed the scene.
Cleaners.
Yeah, cleaners, wet work. Exactly. Think of the wolf in Pulp Fiction. It was played by Harvey Keitel. Quote, "If I'm curt with you, it's because time is a factor. I think fast, I talk fast, and I need you guys to act fast if you want to get out of this."
Such a great scene.
Yeah, it's just right. Just like that wordsmithing there by Quentin Tarantino.
Yes.
Those do happen because people do end up dead and people are killed. And you may not think, because I'm going to talk about this aspect of these cases, and that if you think this is nothing, then walk that back to, is it the fact or the idea that none of this happens? People aren't killed, clandestinely. That never happens. This is just a big conspiracy.
Yeah, people are killed, but like with the wolf, that is a movie.
Right.
Not necessarily how the real world works, but it's probably a lot less glamorous. But pragmatically, cleanups have to happen. But with these guys who've gone missing, there's not a total lack of forensic evidence. The data points toward the possibility of a psychological collapse, like a breakdown, rather than clandestine extractions in some cases. And while we obviously can't, as we said, diagnose anyone on this list or claim to know their state of mind, sociologists use a term that we'll be talking about tonight called anomic distress. That's ANOMIC, to describe what happens when institutions completely isolate their personnel. We'll be talking about that in more detail here.
That's also a problem in the workplace here. And that can have a very profound effect on people. It's a real thing. It's the whole premise behind Severance, which I think I've also mentioned. It's in a severe case, right?
Yes.
But there's a reason for that, and it's psychological manipulation and control. And here it's easy to think about all the training that NASA does with astronauts to deal with isolation on missions to space. We all understand that. In fact, there's there's going to be a lot of pop culture references, movie references. Yeah. There's also a Twilight Zone where they're testing that out on somebody. Exactly what you're talking about. Could somebody survive? And it is relevant here because some of these scientists were working on aspects that would definitely and directly relate to long-term human space travel, which is also why people think it might be connected to something like that. Would you going to go crazy or not? And how do we prevent that? And what happens? But in the Twilight Zone, the person starts to totally hallucinate, whole realities. And then they find out that you didn't actually go anywhere. You were just doing an experiment.
Yeah.
We all understand that factor. You have to deal with long and devastating isolation at times. But it's a lesser known reality that you can be just as isolated right here on Earth if you're in this highly compartmentalized military and state secret structure for your entire career.
Not only is that just as destabilizing as being alone in space, it will only take us 6 months to get to Mars or a year round trip if you get to come back. We're talking about a lifetime here for these folks of not being able to talk either to researchers who are using the work that they're collaborating without knowing to make advances in other areas. They can't talk to their family or friends either. It's the burden of being undercover your whole life.
Not everybody can do it. It's a special service like, which is also the silent service here, being on a submarine. And that's not for everybody. There's a major psychological toll. In fact, there's an Instagram reel of a young guy who served on a submarine who tells you exactly what it was like. And it is not glamorous. And it's very freaky, and there are consequences to your health mentally and emotionally. And so, but to give you an idea about what that's like, you have to look no further than the nickname for these work environments. The Department of Energy and these high-stakes research labs operate what counterintelligence analysts call the mushroom factory. So, kept in the dark and fed excrement.
No, come on.
Yeah, well, what? That's
well, I don't think there's anything here about eating excrement.
No, like a mushroom.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's where the term comes from.
I
It's
know,
like,
but I think the
when you're complaining.
parallels are.
No, I know, but that's what people say. Like, yeah, they keep me in the dark here, and they feed me fertilizer. So, they keep these high-value human assets in the dark, enforcing a rigid need-to-know silo when it comes to information outside their particular area of expertise.
Honestly, I had a friend in college that would disappear for weeks at a time in his dorm room with the blinds drawn. We knew exactly where he was, but he wouldn't come out. We used to say he was mushrooming.
Ooh, have we all had one of those friends? I don't think I have. I think that's a little extreme. I think you're thinking like, oh, that's pretty common. It
was kind of extreme. This dude, he went on to be successful. I'm still not sure what was going on during that period. Perhaps he was just depressed, but I digress. Anyway, there's another factor here too, the Espionage Act, which we should probably define because it's not just a standard corporate NDA. This is the U.S. defense and nuclear workers. They're bound by this, the Espionage Act, and also incredibly strict Q clearance mandates. Now, a Q clearance is the Department of Energy's highest security level. It's basically the civilian equivalent of a military top secret clearance, and it specifically grants access to restricted nuclear data.
Right, and if we all remember, and again, pop culture, QAnon, and that's where they got the moniker. I think it was on 4chan was where that started, but somebody going by Q because they purportedly had the highest level of clearance at the Department of Energy and in a position to know secrets. But most people, I would think, in the public don't think of the Department of Energy as having much to do with this, but it does.
It's way down in the middle of every time you get into something in the weeds on this kind of stuff that we cover on the show. The Department of Energy is kind of the shadow group that no one's really paying attention to. They're like, what? Power plants? What are you talking about?
Windmills? Well, that's nice. And power plants and transmission lines, that's all fine. But and I think they like it that way. But we're talking one of the agencies that has, some of the highest secrets of any nation, certainly here. So, but talking about the Q clearance and the Espionage Act, it means the government legally mandates a completely compartmentalized existence. You can't go home and complain about a stressful project to your spouse. You can't vent to a therapist without clearing them first. And I think they provide therapists who are cleared and vetted.
That's right.
If you slip up, you aren't just getting fired, you are looking at federal prison time, and they have to hold something over you. But everybody knows Area 51. Like, regular people can't all live at the base there. Some do full time, but you have a group of scientists that, well, how do they get them out there? Well, they live in a town with lots of things and resources. It's called Las Vegas, and they fly them out there every day with Janet Airlines. Just another non-existent transport is the
right. And this kind of stuff, these clearances that you have to fear federal prosecution for are the kinds of things that make whistleblowers like Dave Grush and others afraid to talk until they get some kind of deal sorted out that will protect them from going away forever to a federal prison. But there's a psychological component to this that's important here. And when these researchers spend like a decade operating inside that kind of legal silo, there's a cognitive burden that might become unsustainable. You're living a double life by law. That isolation is the literal definition of the anomic distress we talked about earlier. Institutions can inadvertently create the exact psychological conditions that cause their own highly vetted personnel to perhaps have issues, that may possibly even nervous breakdowns or something like that, which might be what we see culminating on February 27th, 2026, just 2 months ago as we're recording this. Now, again, we don't know the circumstances. This is all conjecture. But William Neil McCaslind, a retired Air Force Major General and former commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory, walked out of his Albuquerque home, left his smartphone or a wearable device, I think is what it specifically said, his prescription glasses, the wallet is in question. He's wearing hiking boots. He's got a .38. A silver alert goes out. Again, with silver alerts, people usually say, oh, well, you assume that somebody maybe has Alzheimer's or dementia. It might be confused. But Major General McCaslin's wife, Susan, put out a public statement clarifying that he was not suffering from any kind of cognitive decline. He was not confused or disoriented. Leaving that stuff behind was a deliberate choice. So to understand why a man with General McCasland's background might reach that breaking point, you might look at the exact technology he oversaw, if a breaking point is what happened here, and we'll get to all our different theories later. But he wasn't just looking at standard aeronautics. According to the military's own strategic reports from 2026, the annual statement that they do, the U.S. is currently in a high-stakes sprint to completely overhaul our nuclear weapons and build advanced hypersonic missiles.
So, yeah, a lot of really high-tech, the highest tech, in-depth, secret research happening that he was overseeing. And, of course, connections to the infamous Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where people think a lot of, Roswell, the crash debris was taken, and the whole craft, and possibly NHI bodies and all that kind of stuff. And so that's very much in the UFO lore. So he was doing that. And but you think the guy who's running it would have, obviously, he gets to come home to see his wife. And they have a fairly normal life. He's not somebody that's, again, so sequestered.
He's retired, too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good point, something to point out. He's living a normal retired life. Just imagine you don't get to be a major general, 2-star general.
He's not got like a Tony Stark basement.
No, there isn't. Well, it's not even that. I mean,
side projects, which is what I want him to have. It seems really cool. But
well, who knows?
But he's a supervisor. He's not like
I said, he's maybe not has even all the secrets. I wonder about that. But definitely
right. He could have been kind of siloed himself.
It's like the mob. He's not actually involved, but are you ever really out? And so what was his condition? Well, we do have the 911 call placed by his wife, Susan Mccaslind Wilkerson, hours after he left, because she started calling relatives and friends. Had anybody heard of him? And they said, no, he never contacted anybody. So then she's like, okay, starting to get dark out. I should call somebody. So she calls 911. And during this call, she did tell the dispatcher that, yes, he was facing both physical and mental medical issues. They had been seeing a doctor for those, and that he had some symptoms like anxiety and short-term memory loss, trouble sleeping, things like that. And that she did say or reveal to the dispatcher that he had told her somewhat recently that, quote, if his brain and body keep deteriorating, he didn't want to live like that. But she also said, this guy's put together, basically. He's on the ball. He's got his poop in a group. He is not somebody to go off on a whim, and he wasn't starting to lose his mind where it's like, I don't know where I am. I'm not at home. I gotta go home. As for those of us, with relatives who've gone through dementia, no, it's like there's moments of a lot of clarity, and then there's moments of like, I don't know where I am or what's going on here. This isn't it. I need to get to it. And then they wander off, causing the silver alert. That's usually what that is. They're trying to get home. He wasn't anywhere near that. And it wasn't a fugue state or an episode like that. But yes, she did admit, he was, it's natural aging and decline, and things we all live. But nothing, I think, diagnosed, and certainly not in this 911 call. But yes, that has to be pointed out. He did
or at least they didn't talk about it being diagnosed. We don't know if anything was
right. Those are private matters. There's HIPAA things involved. And again, we're just going off of what she did say, which is in a recording to the 911 dispatcher. She's doing her due diligence as a wife and spouse, just letting them know exactly what's going on. It's like, there was talk of that, but I'm not suspecting he's doing that. He's not having an episode. But getting back to what he was doing for work and what he retired from, these are apocalyptic stakes. These researchers are working on highly complex missile defense shields. And then a lot of them operate in a theater defined by something called GEMSO, which stands for Joint Electromagnetic Spectrum Operations.
To put that simply for folks, that's essentially the invisible battlefield. It's the control of radars, communications, weapon guidance systems. If you lose control of those signals, your advanced missiles and your nuclear deterrent become completely useless. The people on this list of 10 or now 11 or 12, according to some folks, like McCaslind, were intimately tied to this exact kind of technology.
Yeah, so we're talking about immense pressure, unimaginable for the rest of us cubicle workers and people who have normal jobs. You have the implications of the work itself, right? You're talking about the survival of the world if things get totally out of hand. And then you combine that with the extreme isolation of the Q clearance of things you cannot relay to anybody, you're not supposed to. It creates the perfect storm for a human asset to simply break sometimes.
So General Mccasland goes off grid. And I'll just quickly point out, somewhere along the way, he and I are probably related.
Oh,
because my
really?
father's mother's maiden name is McCasland, spelled a little
Oh.
different, but believe me, it's the same thing. McCaslin, my family. We got the tartan, we got all that stuff goes way back on that side of the family. So we probably came across the pond from the same stock.
Yeah,
But,
didn't and your dad also worked on weapon systems?
Yes, my dad did do that, although his last name was not McCasland. It's Philbrook,
Right.
as you might imagine. But anyway, so General Mccasland goes off grid. I sincerely hope he's okay and he'll turn up. Who knows what's going to happen here with that. But he isn't the only one exhibiting digital counter forensics. When the investigators searched Melissa Casillas's home, they found both her personal and work phones, and someone had factory reset them before she vanished. So there's a question. It's like, well, is that something she did? Or did she meet somebody who had ill intentions and they did that? Because my thing is, too, is especially from an intelligence standpoint, why even leave the phones behind, even if they're reset? I feel like the NSA could maybe get something out of them, even if they're reset. But I don't know about that kind of stuff. But
yeah, they still have to work with, as we know from other cases. And again, there's levels. It depends on who you talk to. But we see a lot of whistleblower types. John Kiriakou, who's a CIA whistleblower. People have said, like, there isn't anything they can't do.
Right.
But the higher levels.
There's encryption. There's very hard to break encryption, I believe, which they say, though, and here's the scary part about quantum computing. They're basically saying when that happens, it's going to break all the encryption and maybe the entire global economic system collapses because there are no passwords. There's no security. Yeah, everything is just like, it's all out there for everyone immediately. Money means nothing.
It's Lawnmower Man, remember?
Yeah.
He's basically trying to unlock, he's just trying everything. So his avatar is basically trying every combination of code because his goal is to ring every phone on the planet at the same time.
Right.
If he succeeded. And so that's when you break through. You just try everything because you have that, but it takes a tremendous amount of computing power. But
unless you have a quantum computer, it becomes easier.
Right.
And let's not forget Whopper in War Games, the movie.
That's right.
Which is WOPR, the War Operations Processing something. I can't remember what the R is, but anyway, it's all right. Don't look it up.
I'm Thor MacArthur, and when I'm not bashing giants, I'm listening to Astonishing Legends. Now, back to the show.
So all of this stuff gets back to Representative Eric Burleson, and he demands an FBI probe in March of this year, just a couple months ago. Now, by April, current White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt formally addressed the list of 10 at that time missing scientists on national television. It's pretty remarkable to me that even happened. But there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of articles and stories online about what appears to be some kind of pattern. And the public, or enough of the public anyway, can latch onto that as evidence of a cover-up. Now, to wrap our heads around why a lot of people on the internet immediately assumed a coordinated hit squad was wiping out America's nuclear and aerospace scientists, we should start with some historical precedent that we stumbled across during our research on this topic, which I thought was really fascinating.
War Operation Plan Response.
Ah, there we go. Plan response. Thank you. I'm glad you took the time to look that up.
I could not let that go because it would start to bug me, it burrowing into my brain. But yes, understanding the past is the key to understanding the present.
Ooh, did you just come up with that?
Of course not. No, that's just logic, right? So no, and that's why history is important. Otherwise, you repeat your mistakes from the past. Santa Ana. Somebody said that. The idea, though, is that you do need to have background information. And to your point earlier, what I was thinking of is that there was a terrorist attack. You and I were working together at your house in Southern California where that happened. And two of the wife and husband team that sadly did that, they had their phones. And if you remember, the FBI at the time had to get permission from Apple. And there was a big debate. Should a company who makes the phone cooperate with the police? There's privacy issues, even when it's a case like, no, we need to find out what they were doing to save
Right.
more lives in case there's other people in this network that are going to do the same thing. So you understand why we need the information on the phone, and Apple was digging its heels in. It's like, well, no, if we do that for you, then, so it's a fine point there about from privacy to public safety on a general level. But if we look at the Nancy Guthrie case, what I found interesting in the verbiage that was being reported is that there was no service. She was not paying for a door cam video retention service, right?
It was a Ring Cam, wasn't it?
No, I think it was Google
Oh, it was another
Nest.
brand.
It was Nest, I
Nest.
think.
Okay, yeah.
But the point being is that I heard like, oh, well, there's no cards, there's no storage video
Right.
on the device itself, nothing in the cloud.
Because she wasn't paying for the cloud.
She wasn't paying for it. And so
Right.
this is an important thing because you're going to wonder if there's any footage here about these cases. Well, if there's no cards and no cloud service, how are they getting the video imaging?
It took a
then
couple
later
of
we-
weeks.
It did
Yeah.
take it 10 days.
Yeah.
And what happened is that there's residual bits of video that they can dig out, but it takes a while because you got to piece it together in a BitTorrent kind of way. Like there's bits of
interesting.
information. So as with all this kind of stuff and a trail of clues, as they used to say in computing back in the Cray supercomputer days, because a friend of mine was a scientist working on that. He said,
Cool.
if you don't have data in two different places, it doesn't exist. That was
Yeah.
the old days. Now you can't get rid of it.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
right.
the saying is data never goes away.
Right.
There's fragments of
right.
it somewhere. But that's where we can piece together now in a detective mode of understanding the past being a key to the present.
So this is pretty fascinating. If we go back to the UK between 1982 and 1990, here's something that we're betting a lot of you might never have heard of. It's called the GEC Marconi deaths. And yes, for the history buffs out there, that is the Marconi. The company traces its direct lineage right back to Guglielmo Marconi, the inventor of the radio, which Forrest and I
Yeah.
both studied for our undergraduate degrees, I'll wager.
Right.
Very cool guy. Very cool guy.
Philo Farnsworth.
Yes.
But now Philo is being used as for some branding thing. And
yes, it is.
People
A
may
new
not know.
streaming
Like,
platform, I'm pretty sure.
yeah. More rare one. Somebody had a mechanical image transmission device called the Nipkow disc.
Oh, right. That might have been Vladimir Zworykin. Boy,
No,
we're
that was
really
Nipkow.
nerding out.
I know
here.
that was a
It was
Nipkow.
Nipkow, but Vladimir Zworykin invented some TV that didn't work quite.
It was just a
right.
mechanical way of transmitting
Yes.
images rather than electronically. So
Yes.
there you go. Marconi, famous guy. You
Yes.
should know who he is because
Yes.
he's responsible for what you're listening to right now on this podcast. If you are,
That's right. Eventually it became RCA, his company, I believe.
Yeah.
The audio part of it. Yeah.
The original company was founded way back in 1897, but by the 1980s, it had evolved into a major British military contractor. Marconi, the company, served as a primary builder for the Stingray torpedo and even worked on the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative. Star
yes,
Wars.
SDI, more
Yeah.
commonly known as Star Wars
That's
for people who might be a little young to remember that during the Reagan era. That's what makes what happened to their personnel in this particular series of events so alarming. Over 24 British scientists and defense engineers tied to Marconi died under highly unusual circumstances. And the media at the time labeled it a James Bond-esque string of KGB assassinations,
Yeah.
which again, slow horses. Here we go.
Yeah, Cicada, right?
Yes. Yeah.
One of their episodes, or the great Charles Bronson movie Telephone of sleeper
that's right.
agents being
Yes.
activated. But that stuff did go on. That's my point
right.
here. Really terrific show. But anyway, back then, the fear was very real. It wasn't just vague rumors. Just take a look at Trevor Knight. In 1988, he worked as a computer engineer for Marconi Space and Defense Systems, and he was found dead in his car from carbon monoxide poisoning.
Yeah.
Or look at Vimal Dajabai, a 24-year-old Marconi electronics engineer who died after falling from a suspension bridge. Authorities ruled almost all 25 of those deaths as suicides or isolated accidents.
The sheer volume of that defies standard mortality rates.
Right.
Professor Colin Pritchard at Southampton University ran the numbers. He noted the suicide rate within Marconi was double the expected rate for a group heavily screened for mental health.
Right.
Double the expected rate for a population required to pass intense psychological vetting. That brings us right back to the institutional environment.
Right. And again, these people are tested for that. That's why the numbers aren't right. It's not a sampling of the population in general. The fear of foreign infiltration creates an umbrella around deaths like these. Because if you work in defense and you die, your death automatically belongs to the state. And then the public can strip away your personal life and replace it with espionage to fill in the gaps.
And Shawnee Warren is another perfect example of how these legends grow. In 1987, she worked for a company linked to Marconi. Authorities found her bound and drowned in a lake. And for decades, conspiracy theorists have held her up as the darkest example of the Marconi mystery, the ultimate proof that intelligence agencies were ruthlessly silencing people.
Yeah, and then we can see that same exact mechanism happening right now with the 2026 U.S. cases. Take Carl Grillmayer, a Caltech astrophysicist. He was tragically shot on his own porch in February, and then the internet immediately added him to the list of 10, which by some accounts, as we have been saying, is now up to 12, and I'm sure that's going to grow. And then it leads to another question of mine: how many is too many? We'll address that later on. But yes, the list of 10, let's say, and let's just say 11, because that's what's being reported widely now, of missing and murdered scientists, and called it an assassination, even though local law enforcement nearly immediately tied his murder to an isolated carjacking by a known trespasser. But a quick note here, again, because I do believe that this is possible. As I mentioned earlier, what we do know about the clandestine forces, especially FSB and KGB, is that they don't want authorities to look into deeply. So what do? You tie it to something that is already happening, that is a logical conclusion, a health-related condition already happening. That's, well, there you go, logical outcome, or something that's already happening. And I think, as you were talking about earlier with Shawnee Warren, it could be tied to something, again, that's happening in the area. I don't know. Yes, another movie reference. I won't apologize anymore. But think about the John Travolta movie Blowout, the Brian De Palma version from 1981. In that case, John Lithgow is an agent, so he's a cleaner. All right, he's an assassin, but he makes the murder. Yeah, he is very good. I think but he makes his hits look like the work of a local serial killer.
Right.
And he starts patterning them and comes up with his own thing, which is a Liberty Bell design with his victims. And so people are, we're not looking for, this has nothing to do with espionage. This is a local serial killer, and we're going to get on the case of that. But totally throws the MO off. And that's not the pattern that's happening here. These aren't random. These are hits. So anyway, in the case of Shawnee Warren, we're going to talk about that a little more specifically, because it may be just mundane. That's what we're kind of getting at here. If you sense the theme here, is that what's really going on? Is this really a pattern? Is some of it a pattern? Is none of it a pattern? Those are your logical options.
That's right. Like, you can easily end up here with a form of like daisy chain logic. You string together a tragic hiking accident, maybe in the Angeles National Forest, maybe a random carjacking, possibly some stress or anxiety related problems with General Mccasland. Call it a purge, but we know what actual state-sponsored purges look like, and this isn't necessarily it, or at least it hasn't been in the past. If we want to look at a documented, coordinated targeting of defense scientists, we can turn to Russia, of course. And just to be clear, all of this has been widely covered by Reuters, the BBC, the AP, the Associated Press. Since 2018, the FSB, which is the modern version of the KGB, has systematically dismantled the leadership of the Khrushchevich Institute of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics, or ITAM. They targeted physicists researching hypersonic speeds. Again, this keeps coming up. The Russian government used Article 275, high treason, to aggressively prosecute these researchers, accusing them of passing classified data to China or Iran.
Really? I thought they just sold it to them. But there you go. They can always find an excuse. And as those global news outlets reported, they want the arrests televised. They need the spectacle of prosecution. So Anatoly Maslov gets sentenced to 14 years. Dmitry Kolker gets dragged out of a hospital bed with stage 4 cancer and dies in a detention center. That is what state action looks like in that form. A government silencing a leak wants the public to see the punishment as a deterrent, and also it's a little bit of a show, right?
That's right. And in that case, and that highlights a fundamental difference in how the two governments operate. When the U.S. government suspects a defense contractor or scientist is leaking classified data, they don't send a secret hit squad to make them vanish on a hiking trail. the political and institutional fallout of that, if word got out that had happened, a domestic assassination, that would be pretty catastrophic.
Right. So in some cases, I would say they rely on the bureaucracy to do that. In other cases, I don't agree with that, because it's like, why avoid the sideshow circus? Because then questions are asked and they don't necessarily have to answer. And that's the good part about being in Russia or China or any of these other more authoritarian states, is that you don't have to answer questions.
Yeah.
Keep asking.
That's true.
We don't have to do anything.
I think it depends on what they can get away with. If you're going to be conspiratorial at all with regard to the U.S. government, I think they'll do whatever they can get away with. That's what I think they'll do. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the poison attack.
It's not true, and I like it here, by the way. So,
no, my point is, and look, the thing is, we talked about this before. They just don't care as much about public opinion.
Right.
Like, what are you going to do? You might be next and touching a doorknob coated in poison. Who knows? But the thing is, there's a bunch of different things going on, and they're not shy about doing it. So that's kind of my attitude here, is that why bother, with a bunch of rigmarole here. But sometimes it might be necessary to their means. It's whatever effect that they want to cause and what they want to see about it. So this here, it's like Trotsky, okay? Like they were known, if it was a clandestine thing, not many people are going to know about it. They shoot you in the face with a soft-nosed bullet because it makes a mess and it sends a message. And people just, oh, well, he was murdered, his wallet was gone. How many times have we seen here, though, it's like somebody's murdered, it's like no wallet or watch is gone. And it's like something's happening here because it just doesn't smell right. So, but what you talk about here in some of the other ways that where there are questions and the questions are important, you can use the legal framework, which we were just talking about. The Department of Justice steps in, they freeze your assets, they strip your Q clearance. Again, look at the movies. It's like when you're disavowed by the secretary, suddenly now your parents' credit cards have all been declined. The mortgage has been refused. Things like that. It's just like they just make it a mess. And you know that they can do it. And how are you going to clear all that up? And then they prosecute you under the Espionage Act in a federal courtroom. So this is a legal and administrative neutralization in a way, not a physical purge. But again, I believe it's whatever, not only what they think they can get away with, but whatever suits their narrative.
Yeah, these American cases, they may lack that overt state-sponsored physical violence. We obviously can't say for sure, but that leaves us at a deeply unsettling crossroad. Mm-hmm. The official counterintelligence data tells us these U.S. disappearances and deaths might be the tragic result of psychological stresses, isolated crimes, or mental collapses.
Yeah, obviously, again, that's a possibility. That's why we're researching that angle and talking about it, because there's all these possibilities that are possible. And what is more likely, though? And it's funny, you think that oh, nobody does that. And again, with foreign actors, well, Scott knows, in Russia, in the last few years, a lot of people seem to be falling out of windows. At heights. Defenestration, he tripped. And they fall. My favorite one was, I think it was the general who somehow shot himself in the chest 4 or 5 times.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a suicide. You can say anything you want. Again, it's ridiculous. They don't care. Yeah. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. Yeah. So anyway, but let's talk about the U.S. here in our operations. And we're going to talk about foreign interference possibly, but right now we're talking about Officer Reddit and Agent Reddit, just the internet in general. I love to tease Scott about that because it goes nuts. Is that what's happening here? And the internet here as a collective looks at the counterforensics, the factory reset phones, which is odd, and the impossible scenes. And then they see a coordinated extraction, a sanction. They look at the sheer volume of clearances and they see a purge.
So Forrest mentioned the internet acting as like a collective, looking at this cluster of missing scientists and immediately seeing a coordinated purge. Mm-hmm. Well, that's because human beings are fundamentally uncomfortable with random chaos. When faced with a string of frightening but not necessarily related events, our brains often invent a supervillain or a conspiracy to make it all make sense. In psychology, there's a formal term for this. which we've mentioned already, I believe, apophenia.
Oh, wasn't that a musician that was mentored by
the 80s?
Prince? Prince, yeah.
No, that
Apophenia
was
6.
Apollonia. Yeah, Apollonia.
No, she's terrific.
Yes.
There's something that was related also to remind people, I just thought of it. We were looking at a clip of somebody talking about how the news agencies now are all, we've talked about this before. How do all these articles get something wrong? And with fallacies that are passed down from generations, especially when it comes to way out wacky incidents and legends. Well, because people just copy each other rather than doing that.
Right.
And so what we have now is the problem of AI summarizing things, and then you get boiled down stuff which may not be the truth. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the middle road. It's the path of least resistance when it comes to data. It's scraping just comments. That's where it learned all the stuff. So you're not getting maybe the best answers for things. You're just getting like, well, this is what you want to hear, right? This is the most logical, middle of the road answer. So you're aiming for mediocrity and you're hitting it.
Yeah, right.
But it may not be what actually is going on. That's the answer you're getting when you do stuff like that. And of course, journalists are relying as well on AI, and so are things like Reuters and different news outlets and agencies. You're getting this. It's not a great trend, but you just have to be aware of it. We can't do anything about that. You just have to be aware, and you have to do your own research and try to be broad-minded. So that's the deal. Is this something like apophenia?
Right.
But in that case, apophenia is the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between completely unrelated things.
And that's how we get conspiracy theories. It takes a handful of genuine anomalies and it starts aggressively scraping the news, the internet being the it here, for anyone with a science degree who died in the last decade to pad the numbers. And there's no question that some journalism-focused websites that no longer have journalists are doing this because they have bots out trying to coalesce anything that'll get a click. But just because the internet is jumping to conclusions doesn't mean there aren't genuine mysteries buried inside this list of missing folks or strange disappearances or crimes. And to see exactly how apophenia collides with actual high strangeness, I feel like we should start by taking a closer look at the disappearance of Monica Resza.
Yeah, I think for me, we're talking about how we rank these. I think that's got an element to that story, which for me is the highest of the strangeness. This is what's curious about this thing, is that you and I often think alike, of course, but you will take a different tack, which I can recognize. It's a logical, human-based thing rather than something paranormal.
Yes.
But before that, there's two other concepts I want to talk about. I've mentioned this on the show before because this all boils down to a lot of what we do here at the show and how we approach things and how we think about it, and things you should remember and keep in mind when you do it. One of the concepts I've mentioned before has a Latin moniker for it, or phrase, and that is post hoc ergo propter hoc. And what that means is that it's kind of an informal fallacy proposition that states, well, the actual Latin translation is after this, therefore because of this. Meaning, if something happened, and then because something else happened, that must be the cause. You know what I'm saying? It's like...
Well, is that the correlation does not equal causation, which I think Carl Sagan thing...
Right, what we were talking about earlier, in that he was often popularly tagged for that saying, but like a lot of Carl Sagan things, it actually is filtered down from somebody else. Again, no ideas are new. They're just rephrased for the times that they get uttered, and of course mentioned in some book in the 1800s. It first appears, like conspiracy theorists.
Francis Bacon.
Which I think that first popped up in the late 1800s, but then was popularly used for something related here by the CIA for labeling people to dismiss them. It's like, well, that's a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy theorist. And it's like, oh, nutcase, I get it. Read between the lines. That's what that means. And it worked to great success, especially when the Project Blue Book era came out. But here, what we're talking about is that it's causality, right? So because event Y followed event X, right? X happened first, then Y happens. Event Y.
I didn't know there was going to be math.
It's not just alphabet. You know these letters.
Okay, good.
Stands in for X, right? So because event Y happened after this event X, then event Y must have been caused by event X. You get it? It's pretty simple.
Right.
But it's a fallacy because the event is presumed to have been caused by something that just happened right after that. Why are things coming out of me in both ends? Well, I had a niçoise salad for lunch. The tuna smelled a little funky, and now I'm sick. Well, it's probably...
That's your example for this?
That's what I'm saying.
Is that what you spent time writing down
I
today
didn't write
to
it, just
prepare
off the
for
top
this
of my
portion?
head. And do you know why? Because what is the most common
Why?
thing where it's like, uh-oh, this is not good. There's a rumbly in the tumbly. What's the first thing you
Yeah.
think? Like, well, what did I eat?
Yeah.
But it's just
sure.
like, okay, what's happening here? Well, you don't correlate that. Oh, you also had something from breakfast that was the preserves that were canned that were not good. It turned into,
Mhm.
it was botulism, but it took longer for that to happen. It wasn't the salad, it was something else.
Right.
What you
Right.
know is that you're still sick and that something came into your body to cause this, but it was the wrong thing. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
it could be a
Right, sure.
fallacy. And so just
Yeah.
because it happened, just closely happening, that's like, oh, got to be that. Reading the wiki entry here on it, it's like this type of reasoning is fallacious because mere temporal succession does not establish a causal connection. It's often
Right.
shortened to just post hoc fallacy. So
Right.
there you go. It's a little different from there's another fallacy, cum hoc ergo propter hoc, which is with this, therefore because of this. And so you'll hear variations, but that's the idea. Something happened, there you go. As they say here with Decision Lab, instead of weighing every possible variable, which would be cognitively overwhelming, heuristics enable good enough conclusions that save time and mental energy. They prioritize speed, over perfection. So just getting a rapid response is better than finding just the optimal solution. It reduces your cognitive load. You don't have to think about it that hard. It's an automatic process. So just fast thinking. It's like, that happened. I'm not going to do that again.
Right.
And so how is this relevant? This is what the internet is. Speed over perfection or deep diving.
Right.
You don't
Sure.
want to think about this too hard because it's like, I don't have time to go research all these articles. Certainly Scott and I tried to, and it's a lot, as he'll tell you,
Yeah.
to go through like,
Yeah.
what did
Yeah.
so-and-so say? Why is this article reporting this and this one isn't? And they're contradicting each other. Nobody has time for that.
Yeah.
The internet is very shallow. And sadly, I think all of the younger students these days, it's getting shallower and shallower and it's harder to focus. So it's like, just give me the quick thing. It's automatic. You don't have to think about it.
And there's a turd in the pool.
That's right. So I'll just swim in it. That's the big question. Do you fish it out and then swim in it? That is, what I'm saying? It's like, well, the thread is gone, but
Yeah.
like it's got
Yeah.
the taint of it. So, but it's
Yeah.
just like, that's how daily life is. That is how the internet is engineered for the shallow thinking
Yeah.
to guide you mostly to buy more stuff. So
Right.
were we getting all these clips and reels and all this information? It's like, we don't have time to dig through all that. So it goes to, this looks like a pattern. This is concerning. It's sensational. It's salacious. It's sad. It's tragic. It's all that. But like, ooh, well, what's going
But
on?
how much click revenue is it generating?
Right. And that is
know?
a factor. You
The
have to.
scarier it is. Yeah.
So keep
exactly.
all of this in mind. We tried to, but it's really hard these days. You go, I mean, this is,
Yeah.
I send stuff to Scott as clips and reels, way too many. He doesn't have time to read all these, but sometimes he'll say like, this was fake. Cause you'll actually like just plug it into like Chat GTP or so.
Yeah.
It's like, well, this is fake. It's like,
Yeah.
frankly, I didn't care. I thought it was entertaining, but most
Right.
people aren't doing that. And that's a problem here. So what
Yeah.
we're talking
Yeah.
about is these kind of conspiracy theories that may or may not have something to them. And when you look at
Mhm.
like the case, getting back to Monica Resza,
Mhm.
okay, so people go on hikes all the time. We did the missing 411. This
Yeah.
happens all the time. People go missing in the woods. That's just natural. That's going to happen. Well, what are the details
Right.
of this in her case? Looking at her and her background, she was the director of materials processing at NASA JPL, and she disappears in
Right.
June 2025. And within weeks, online sleuths figured out her research had funding ties to General Mccasland's operations, which, okay, so is that enough? That's enough to go on to look deeper into it.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah.
I'm encouraging
Yeah.
that. Question everything. Look at everything.
Right.
And what's the current bulletin, though, about her disappearance? Well, as of our research here, this is coming from the LA County Sheriff's Department.
Yes.
Detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department are seeking assistance in locating Monica Resza, resident of Los Angeles County, who was seen hiking on June 22nd, 2025 at 9:10
Last seen.
a.m.
Last
Yes,
seen.
he was last
It is
seen.
last
then. Not just, oh,
Yeah.
she popped up again, no worries.
Yes.
No, that's when she was last seen. So in the morning, 9:10 a.m., there's a 6,000 foot day use parking area. That's the lot along the Los Angeles Crest Highway. And
Right.
the rest of their bulletin goes, there is a concern for Ms. Resza's well-being. And Scott and I will tell you another thing that adds to the mysteries is that this is another urban legend or lore, is that there are a lot of high-speed motorcycles in those ravines because a guy's going way too fast and skidding off. It's super steep and very thickly brushed, and you'll never find them again. It's like they just never came back. They didn't tell anybody they were going out for a ride. They just never
Nobody knows
returned.
where they went.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There's some additional details here. It says Monica was hiking in the San Gabriel Wilderness area within the Angeles National Forest with 2 others on the trail to Waterman Mountain summit. She became separated from the other 2 hikers and has not been located since. And you can easily find this spot on Google Earth, this area where she was parked, which, as Forrest said, it's actually that particular parking lot, according to Google Earth, is around 6,300 feet in elevation.
Did you look at the terrain or Google Earth?
Yeah, it's steep.
It's steep, but is it thickly forested? Is it real brushy?
No, it's not, actually.
Okay.
It's more just kind of rough terrain with sparse trees spread out. But, depending on the time of year, the road up there actually gets closed fairly frequently, and the trails do as well, from snowfall and other issues happening.
A lot of people don't realize that Los Angeles, the basin there, is considered high desert environment.
Right.
It is still part of the desert, but it's a lot like probably northern Arizona. And people think, all of Arizona's hot. Well, yeah, Flagstaff and north gets hot, but it can be thickly brushed, but also sparse.
Yeah.
So it's not like Olympic National Forest in the Northwest, where it's so densely wooded because there's so much moisture. It's Southern California terrain.
Yes. Yes.
Now here's the strange thing for me. She did vanish while hiking with friends. This is what was reported by the friends. Supposedly she was just 30 feet behind one of the friends, smiling and waving, and then he looked back again and she was gone. And they couldn't find her, but they did find her hat in a ravine. But that's about
later,
it.
Not immediately. But
later.
Yeah.
So what does this sound like to me? What's the first thing I thought of when I hear? And it's funny, you hear these stories on the news in the background. It's like, wait a second, she was 30 feet behind friends, and they turn around the next moment and she's gone. It's not like she ran away to the side, either side of the trail, or fell down the trail, because she would have had to have been unconscious, because I'm sure they're yelling for her like, Monica, Monica, and nothing. So my mind immediately jumped to, this is the missing 411 type of case.
There are some very steep areas right next to the trail there, large boulders. There's actually a Facebook thread that I found from back when she disappeared. And there were a lot of people posting on it. Of course, it's Facebook. You can't verify it. One person was like, this was a friend of mine from high school. I hope they find her. It's a sad thread because it's now 42 weeks old or something. And there's no conclusion. But there are some descriptions in there that talk about how she was with friends, and some people were jogging down and they passed her. And lots of people saw her. And there was one other hiker that maybe stayed back with her. And they don't understand how that person lost track of her. And there were other people on there that were SAR-oriented, search and rescue-oriented people on that thread. And I know this a little bit. My dad used to do some volunteer for several years for search and rescue out in Death Valley, believe it or not. And one of the things that can happen is between the time that somebody says, this person was right here, now they're gone. And then by the time the authorities get there, the witness has lost track of where exactly the last contact point was. So the search winds up going in the wrong direction or something like that. But by the same token, up here, and I didn't read this, I can't confirm this, but I feel like there's no question they had helicopters in the air.
Yeah.
They were looking, people were combing everywhere, and since then have still been looking, and not a trace. After that hat, that's it. There's nothing. Just gone. And it is rugged terrain. It's easy to slip and fall down out of sight or have a sudden medical emergency, but you would think if her friends knew exactly where she was last, they could find her or at least point somebody to where she might have fallen to. So that's the part that's the most bizarre thing about this for me.
Listen, forget all the rest, where she worked. That's what I'm saying about missing 411. Forget the rest of this, the context. And this is kind of my point here. Let's look at what we do know. Well, the friends are there, unless they're in on some major conspiracy. I don't think so. There's not just one other friend. There's I think 2 or 3 other people.
Yes, yeah.
It was at least 2.
It was a group.
I think there was at least 2 other people near her. Pace out 30 feet. It's not that far.
Right.
Just walk that out with just heel to toe. It's not that far away. If somebody falls there's a sound, there's brush. I would yell like, oh, help, whatever. Unless, like I said, you would have to fall, slip, hit your head. Even then, she's going to stay put. If she rolls down a ravine, you're going to hear that in the brush.
Yeah, and if you wake up later, even if you're knocked unconscious and people are looking for you, you should be able to yell or cry for help at that point.
There's no slipping.
Unless you've fallen down a cliff, which
Right.
is not what this necessarily is. So
It's not in the Grand Canyon where you just, like that poor unfortunate person who was taking a selfie and fell over the edge. Like I said, there's people
Right.
who hear that. There's going to be yelling on the way down. None of that. She vanishes into thin air.
I'm Amber, and when I'm not working full-time or in search of the mysteries of the world, I'm listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Getting back to Resident, this is what I'm setting up is like, that's what it smells like to me. Just something off. Like, I mean, again, if it was like, oh, well, she was 100 yards behind us or 200 yards, like, okay, she fell down in the ravine. They just can't find her. But again, a thorough and exhaustive search was conducted immediately by the friends and then by the authorities. It's only 30 feet away. It's so unsettling. It's quiet. There's no sound, no trace, nothing. And it was so unsettling that the Crescenta Valley Sheriff's Office eventually brought in the Homicide Bureau to investigate because, again, this is not normal. This is more than just a slip and fall.
Yeah, something unusual. And you don't have to invent a grand overarching government conspiracy to realize that what happened here defies logic.
Right.
You have an aerospace genius evaporating in front of her friends.
Right.
That's a locked room mystery, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
Just instead of a locked room, it's a hiking trail. But when we look at the other core cases in this cluster from this year and last year, mystery shifts a little bit, which brings us back to Melissa Casillas.
The Los Alamos administrator.
Exactly. She worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, top tier access. At least that's our understanding.
Mm-hmm.
As we said earlier, when she vanished, she didn't just walk away from her house. Law enforcement found both her personal smartphone and her highly secure work phone there, left behind at her home, but they were both factory reset.
Yeah, which is, if nothing nefarious is going on, why would she do that?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be found, or you're going to meet someone or something where the phone was not needed, would be a hindrance, and you don't want anything left behind. Or obviously someone else did it.
Yeah.
And this, again, is where the mundane explanation completely breaks down for me, okay? Getting back to our previous idea, if someone is suffering from that isolation at work, which I get that, it seems a little thin to me, that what we talked about before. It should be mentioned, and it's a thing that some people can't handle, like I said, but typically, like I said, you're not in that much isolation. You know, they typically don't do that kind of thing. Right. This is a counter-forensic tactic. That seems like more of a protocol for the victim or the aggressor.
Yeah, it is a protocol. And you see a different kind of protocol with yet another person in this that's wrapped up in all this, Stephen Garcia. Garcia was a property custodian at the Kansas City National Security Campus, where he oversaw the physical inventory for the manufacturing of 80% of the non-nuclear components for the U.S. nuclear arsenal. In August 2025, he just walks away. He leaves all his personal belongings, his keys, his ID, but like McCaslind, he takes a handgun with him.
Interesting. Which changes the entire psychological profile. You leave your ID to become a ghost of sorts, but then you take a gun either because you're experiencing a threat you need to defend against, which you know you're walking into, or maybe you're contemplating taking your own life, but that also doesn't track for me. You know, it's a lot harder to do that in a way that you've never found than most people think. And also, I think it's the cliche is true, everyone leaves a note.
Right.
There's something weird statistically, like I know that's a meme and a trope, but like, no, that's actually true. Most people do leave a note if they're doing that because they realize even though they're going to do this thing and they feel hopeless, the world is better off without them, as they feel they should have some kind of explainer for other folks. So the idea, though, that you're going to take your own life and then kind of disappear, it's a lot harder to do that in a way that you're never found than most people think. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a lot harder to just vanish in a blip off the face of the earth than people think, because we all leave trails all the time.
Well, this begs another question, honestly. If someone in one of these positions does take their own life, and again, this is speculation, but with their clearances and history, is it possible maybe the government would recover their remains but not tell the public about it? I don't know, as I say that out loud. It's hard to imagine them doing that to the families, but, stranger things have happened if you're a top security clearance person. I don't know. Maybe there's a reason to keep the discovery of that out of the news or something, out of the news cycle.
To achieve that without a trace takes practice and a high degree of capability and functioning. It's something that I saw a security expert talk about, sadly, again, with the case of Nancy Guthrie, and looking at the video of the guy. One of the things that struck me about what he saw on the video, the doorbell video, was that he looked like a very low functioning person. It's just weird the way he's... He picks up some brush from the sidewalk there. Does he think that's going to stick over the camera lens? It's just very weird. You would see in the movies a guy chewing a piece of gum, and then he sticks the gum. Something that's going to stick, not just a clump of dandelions. And so here, when you're talking about wiping phones, well, I would imagine her phones had passcodes on them, or basically just a hard reset, like if you lose your phone, right? And then you can do it that way. But it takes some thinking, right? If you look at the intelligence analysis reports tracking these patterns of attrition with missing people, intelligence officers have a term for this. They call it James Bond signatures. We've seen this exact level of technical counterforensic vanishing before. Remember, we saw it in the 1980s with the GEC Marconi deaths.
Yeah, right. That's a historical precedent.
Yeah, exactly. And while Marconi executives try to write off 25 dead scientists as standard stress or suicides, the contemporary coroners pointed out that the sheer technical proficiency of these victims allowed them to devise what they called ingenious and accident-proof methods of self-destruction, methods that almost look like professional assassinations.
This is pretty crazy. In 1986, again, this is the Marconi, some of the folks that supposedly took their own lives during the Marconi thing in the 80s. In 1986, Ashad Sharif tied a nylon rope to a tree and his own neck, and then engaged in the creep motion of his automatic Audi to ensure a slow, inescapable suffocation. In 1987, David Sands, satellite project manager, packed his car with gas cans and rammed it into a disused building at 80 miles per hour, which, by the way, he had to make a U-turn to do. And perhaps most chillingly, in 1988, Brigadier Peter Ferry, a Marconi executive, was found dead with 2 electric wires fastened to his back molars with sticky tape plugged directly into a wall socket.
And that's the core of the mystery right here. When you look at Melissa Casillas wiping her phones, or Stephen Garcia walking off with a handgun, or Major General Mccaslind doing the same thing, or even Peter Ferry in the 1980s, you're looking at highly vetted people vanishing or dying via incredibly sophisticated counterforensic methods. And so whether it's a foreign adversary covering their tracks or a brilliant mind executing a flawless escape from the system, the simple explanation doesn't seem to be big enough to hold the facts.
Yeah, here's the other interesting thing about Peter Ferry. He had actually tried to drown himself 4 days earlier, apparently. He had been in a car accident, and his family had said that he hadn't been the same since then, was suffering from PTSD. But he had retired from the British Army in 1981 as a brigadier, and GEC Marconi scooped him up. Practically speaking, he was their ultimate military liaison. He had direct access to highly classified Ministry of Defense files, and at the time of his death, he was the chairman of the NATO Industrial Advisory Group.
So that's a sweeping international security clearance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And investigators widely speculated he was coordinating the British end of the U.S. Star Wars program. He held the keys to the kingdom there. So, and this was a big deal. If you're old enough to remember this, certainly I do from this time period. Everybody was talking about SDI, which became Star Wars, which they tried to change the name. I think even Lucas was like, "Stop," and then it was too late.
Well, no, you need a sound bite.
Yeah, and you don't hear about it anymore. But you know what? It's probably up there, probably working.
There's something, yeah. Again, that also figures into, I think, maybe the conclusions section is that there perhaps is use with highly charged particle directional beam weapons that may have been used in some of these cases. But in this, you're talking about the electrocution by teeth deal.
Even if someone is experiencing a profound mental break from a car accident or work stress or whatever, the sheer technical precision required to meticulously strip wires, tape them to your own back molars, and connect them to an outlet, it takes a lot of planning and it's very precise.
Yeah, engineered though, but again, through a clever mind. It's like, is that the amount of work you want to go through? Well, it's your swan song of sorts. Something that you thought was creative, perhaps. I don't want to speculate, of course, from a psychological angle, but like, it's just a strange thing to do. But again, you might be under these different stresses. But again, these are more mundane to me in a sense, but like there's two types of mundane, as I was mentioning earlier.
Right. And the mundane explanations are not big enough for some of these specific cases. And that's what fuels the media and the internet firestorm. It's
Right.
Like, these simple answers are not working for us. There's a lot of people, we don't all agree. And so we got to find something else.
There's always one twist, like I said, in the stories that we've been talking about, usually not just somewhere that somebody worked or they had a health condition that predates their employment somewhere or whatever it is that there's one element to these stories, usually in these cases that we found so far, which throws a wrench into it. It can't be dismissed. And I don't blame anybody for saying like, no, we should really look into this. And now, of course, officially, the administration is apparently going to investigate this stuff because as much as what we're talking about, like, no, this is not connected at all. Each story usually has something strange about it.
Right.
But that's where our job gets really difficult, sussing all this out, because when the White House and Congress get involved, the internet feels validated, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Serious people are going to look into this. But if we're going to look at this full list of 10 scientists, or 11 or 12, how do we separate the wheat from the chaff here?
And let's look at the ones that have been documented so far. First, we have Jason Thomas. He was a pharmaceutical researcher testing cancer treatments who was found dead in a Massachusetts lake.
Right.
We have Michael David Hicks, Frank Maywald. Both NASA JPL researchers died in 23 and 2024, respectively. We know that Hicks had heart disease. No cause of death was listed for Maywald.
Right. And if you have no released cause of death, the internet tends to immediately fill that vacuum with a conspiracy. But as we said earlier, there might be reasons for that. And then also sometimes when it doesn't happen, it's like, okay, there was cause for that. Why didn't it happen? So there's cause for both sides of that thinking. And then there's a leap between a private family health matter and an orchestrated assassination. And you see that same leap of the violent deaths on the list. Nuno Loureiro was a director at MIT, was shot at his home in Massachusetts. Carl Grammer was a Caltech astrophysicist, shot to death on his own front porch in California.
And those are horrific crimes, but they're local crimes. They don't feature all of these other details we've been talking about. They're being dragged into the narrative simply because these folks were super intelligent and they held high-level clearances. But when you look at the actual police reports, the hit squad theory kind of, for me anyway, it kind of falls apart. Now, Nuno Loureiro's murder, that's undeniably tragic, but the investigators matched the ballistics to a single suspect, a lone gunman who committed a highly publicized mass shooting at Brown University 2 days prior before eventually taking his own life. So there's no gray area there. And you see the exact same thing with Carl Grammer. He was shot on his porch, but police arrested the suspect almost immediately in the area, 29-year-old man caught fleeing a separate carjacking and burglary. It's just a sloppy, chaotic, frightening, but it's a local crime. Or is that guy an undercover assassin?
Well, I know you're being flip, sir, and facetious, but there's always the way out, the weird and the woo. And where it comes up here is actually something you posted, which I found pretty fascinating. I think I finished the article. It was kind of a long one, but it was an article written by Whitley Strieber, who poses something kind of way out there. And I know it sounds wacky, but here's the thing. He was wondering, it's like, were these people a form of sleeper agent or mind manipulation?
Right.
We don't know their backgrounds other than, they look, a lot of these horrific, tragic acts of violence are committed by people with perceived grievances, and they feel like the rest of the folks have to suffer, or they're going to get revenge, whatever their case is. But they're troubled people, they start off with. And you think like, okay, what do you mean, mind control? Like somehow they were sleeper agents and they were triggered. Come on. that doesn't happen. You've gone beyond the pale. I don't believe in that stuff. Yet, we do know, and as we've covered, projects like MK Ultra did happen. That's proven. The CIA had files on them. Remember the story about how they were discovered? They were filed accidentally at the CIA and then somehow unearthed when there was another, like a proto FOIA request. They were dug up and they found these files, and that was back in the day. Frank Church, Senator Frank Church.
I think it was accidental.
No, they never meant to do
Yeah.
that. Somebody misfiled them. They brought up the files. It's like, oh, these are here. Well, this is interesting. We asked for this,
Right.
and we got this tucked inside. And Senator Frank Church from Idaho, I believe he was head of the Armed Services Committee, and they looked into this, and there was a full investigation. Turns out, yeah, they did all this.
Right.
All the stuff you think, like, that's crazy. Our government doesn't do that stuff. Mind control, getting people to act as like triggered assassins that are in a sleeper state they can be triggered. Yes, that actually happened. And as we know, who conducted that research was psychiatrist Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. Let's see, he was at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal. They've sadly dosed people with high levels of LSD and other drugs, mind altering.
Sure.
Because what a great way to have an assassin. They're disposable people. They're troubled, or maybe they're just unwitting and unwilling, soldiers that came in that were experimented on, and they wanted to see, could they do that? Well, it's not way out there. And if you want to go down the conspiracy route, it's like what Sirhan said when he shot RFK, that he didn't remember any of it. Then people will say like, oh, in the photos and some of the, I think the still photos and maybe some news film, there's the woman in the polka dot dress, I think wearing the hat, obscuring her face, and she seems to put a hand on his shoulder before it happens. Mm-hmm. Was that the trigger? I know it's crazy, but there's a lot of shows now about sleeper agents. And what we mentioned was Slow Horses and Cicada, and also Treadstone, which is a series on USA about a whole list of people who are sleeper agents. When I mentioned the Charles Bronson late 70s, early 80s movie Telephone, and the trigger is that somebody just has to say to them, and Donald Pleasance is the escaping Russian scientist who triggers all this across America. They just have to hear the phrase from Robert Frost's poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. That's all it takes. Or a touch. Something, it's like a triggering phrase.
What if I just got up and walked out of my studio here and then you saw something on the news? I did something tomorrow.
Usually it's something, you don't want an accidental trigger, so it's kind of obscure. But like what's interesting is that these people have led, they've led normal lives, their entire lives. I know this sounds way out there, but like the idea of these random people who are kind of troubled, who exactly what they would pick on, what they would unfortunately call disposable people with a grudge, it might be perfect.
Well, let's circle back here as we're getting near the end of the show to Major General Mccaslind. Back before he retired from the Air Force in 2013, he was the commander of the Air Force Research Lab, as we said, reportedly overseeing the groundwork for nuclear modernization and invisible battlefield tech that people like Garcia, Casillas, and Resza were working on in 2025. And because Mccaslind moved into the private defense sector after retiring, he kept his clearances. So he probably stayed in the mix. So the internet sees this architecture of the system vanishing at the exact same time the current builders are vanishing, and they link them together. And of course, Mccaslind was at Wright-Patterson, which we also mentioned a little bit
everybody who's interested in the genre knows Wright-Patterson, again, which we mentioned a little while ago, is supposedly the depository of recovered materials from Roswell, both mechanical and biological. Also, supposedly where tests of Die Glocke, the Nazi bell, were conducted right after the war, because people know
we
something.
have a series on that. If you're interested in it, look it up.
Which is like, that's it, because somebody scrubbed the entire wiki page on that.
Right.
I just listed it as pseudo baloney. So thank you, Guerrilla Skeptics.
Here's the other thing about General Mccaslind. He was mentioned in some leaked 2016 emails as an advisor on UFO disclosure, and he briefly served as an unpaid consultant for Tom DeLonge's to the Stars Academy. So he was circling disclosure for folks that, that's...
Yes, and of course, his wife, Susan McCaslind Wilkerson, explicitly addressed this on Facebook, saying, Neil does not have any special knowledge about ET bodies and debris from the Roswell crash stored at Wright Pat. Though at this point, with absolutely no sign of him, maybe the best hypothesis is that aliens beamed him up to the mothership. However, no sightings of a mothership hovering above the Sandia Mountains has been reported. Now, to confirm, she wrote all that herself?
Yep.
That is her entire statement, end to end.
Yep.
Okay, a couple of things here. One, if he did have any special knowledge, he's not telling her. She's not going to know anything about it.
That's true.
It's not like, well, he never told me about it. Like, well, yeah, that's the protocol, is that he would not mention, and you think he's going to, no, he's not going to, he's not supposed to. Even your spouses, your children, nobody is supposed to know about this. That is part of you talk about the Espionage Act. That is part of the deal you signed.
Yeah.
I've known people who were suspected of being spooks, spies. All their family knew is they work for the State Department. That's it. And they travel a lot. Right. They're not going to say, hey, guess who we offed last week in, in the Donbass. Okay. They don't mention any of that. Again, this is no shade on her and what she wrote. Okay. Yeah. What I'm saying is that, and no disrespect to her, but like saying something, maybe the best hypothesis is that aliens beamed them up.
Forrest and Scott, thank you for supporting their sponsors. I'm Ari. Now back to the show.
Well, here's the thing. When you look at these victims here, they do all intersect with McCaslin's portfolio.
Yes, Stephen Garcia managed the Kansas City National Security Campus in Albuquerque, which, again, manufactures 80% of the non-nuclear components used in the military's nuclear weapons. And then you combine that with Melissa Casillas and Anthony Chavez, who both worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And all three are tied directly to the nuclear modernization McCaslind was supposedly overseeing prior to retiring and possibly still connected into with the private sector.
Right. And what about the aerospace and missile defense side of all of that?
Yeah, that links straight to the NASA JPL and Caltech victims. Monica Resza was JPL's director of materials processing. Remember, she came up with the Mondaloy material.
That's right.
She was ahead of that. Right. And, according to sleuths, her research had potential funding links directly tied to McCaslind's operations. I'd read that in several reports as fact.
Yes.
And then you have Carl Grillmair at Caltech, whose astrophysics work was specifically tied to missile tracking technology used by the Air Force. And then you also have JPL scientists, Michael David Hicks and Frank Maywald, caught in the same exact orbit, so to speak. And then one of the scientists, it was so sad because his co-workers were saying he was irreplaceable with his research on exoplanets and humans surviving in space and all that. And it's sad when brilliant minds are lost because you don't get that back.
Yeah, it is. And here's the thing. When you lay it out with all these people, you can see why the public at large is getting kind of freaked out, right? You have the guy formally apparently commanding nuclear modernization or some portion of that or a period of that. And then the people handling the components that he's in charge of, missile tracking, materials processing, they're all disappearing. But, I do wonder too, how big a pool of people that is. And what's the comparative subset of, if you take this section of humanity, what portion of them are having things happen, like strange crimes or disappearances or car accidents or things like that, versus all the people that are working in the field, which we don't necessarily really have a number for.
This is another phenomenon. It's like with different sociological studies, when you start off in small groups, small differences get extrapolated exponentially when you expand that out on an entire country level, at a mass population level. So it's things like that where things amplify. So yeah, the internet just keeps casting the net wider to encompass the broader umbrella of national security, which, again, not saying that's good or bad, just saying that that's the way it unfolds. That's how Nuno Loureiro's groundbreaking nuclear fusion research at MIT and Jason Thomas's defense-linked pharmaceutical research get dragged into the list of 10 or 11. I'm going to say 10 dash. It's every day there's a new thing. That's the other thing about.
There's another person being added.
Scott and I didn't want to wait another month to come out with this because we wanted to talk about this and just start the conversation on our end.
Right.
But who knows what's going to unfold. But yeah, if you touch a government contract, you get pulled into the Mccasland gravity well. And now we're going to talk about what we think is going on. So where are you at with all this?
Well, honestly, it's a lot. I mean, when it comes to the 10, I'm seeing 5 and 5. I see 5 people who I feel, while tragic cases, don't necessarily connect to a grand conspiracy. That said, 10 people in that short of a time frame feels like something is happening. But for me, I'm splitting this list down the middle. We've got tragic deaths that are connected to local crimes in some cases, private health matters, like you said a minute ago, horrific mass shooting, a botched neighborhood carjacking, or, at least that's what happened after the guy took a shot at the porch there. But because they happen to brilliant folks with high-level clearances, everything gets lumped together. And again, we've seen this happen before with the Marconi cluster. And we mentioned earlier in the show a woman named Shawnee Warren, who during the Marconi deaths was found bound and drowned in a lake. And for 35 years, her death was held up as the ultimate proof of a massive government assassination ring. But in 2022, just 4 years ago, DNA evidence finally proved that she had been the victim of a local serial predator. And so that was just a horrific, tragic crime that got swept up into this international conspiracy because her company was tied to Marconi. And I think that things like that could be happening with the 5 of the people on this list, which leaves us with the other 5, the core cluster, if you will: Monica Resza, Anthony Chavez, Melissa Casillas, and Stephen Garcia, and of course, General Neil McCaslind. This is the other side. Now, I know that you might talk about Amy Eskridge in a minute. She's an 11th that has come to prominence just since we started working on this. But I'm leaving her out for now because I'm not sure about her. But with these second 5, they're the more impossible cases to me. And with all due respect to these folks' families, you could talk me into moving some of the second 5 into the first column, really. Resza's case is bizarre for sure. We talked about it. And we talked about the missing 411 and all of that. But disappearing on a hike, even in close proximity to friends and family, can happen. I think humanity actually has a little bit of overconfidence in the wilderness. But Politis has shown us some cases that really defy explanation, though, as a counterpoint.
Yeah.
Resza's case is super strange, especially after all this time. It's not an automatic slam dunk. And I meant to tell you, Forrest, I don't think it's in our script anywhere. She was a pretty small person. I think she was 4'11" and only around 100 pounds.
Yeah, well, you're saying she fell down between 2 rocks in a crevasse and a crevice. But here's what I think. Again, when people write articles, it's like, well, that happens all the time. It's like, yeah, but they're usually found.
I don't think this happens all the time, by the way. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it can happen.
It can happen, but the dogs picked up no scent. I don't think there's been any rains. That's another strange factor.
See, I didn't read about dogs. Did you read about dogs? Okay.
I did. And again, Scott and I want to make this clear. There's a lot of reporting going on. And
that's interesting. That's super interesting. I didn't know that.
They're reputable sources, but even then, we don't know where they're getting their stuff. And there's no recourse if they do, if they get it wrong.
Right.
Maybe they issue a retraction, but no skin off their noses. That's another thing. Like I said, it's a vanishing. Again, no, dogs couldn't pick up any sense, but we know that happens. Weird. But then usually there's reasons for that. Like I said, in the Bigfoot cases, there was a rain a couple of days later, washed away the scent. There are reasons for that, but put all this together, and it's like,
right.
There would have been. Look, I've had friends where we've been out hiking on different trails, and you take a different path, and it's like, I can find you later.
Yeah,
pretty easily, because like I said, even if you're being quiet, there's something else going on here. But anyway, please continue.
I agree with you about Resza. I'm on the fence about her, but I do feel like Chavez, Casillas, and Garcia. I feel like I'm saying Casillas' name different every single time. I apologize.
Yeah.
I feel like with them and McCaslind, I'm a lot more stumped. I can see about the work stress and, constantly being immersed in doomsday kind of stuff. That can add up to a lot of pressure over the course of life. In fact, we have friends that are true crime podcasters. I don't even know how they do that. Being immersed in true crime all the time, podcasting year round about it. I don't think I could handle even that.
Well, ask your wife how she got her fill of true crime.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how she does that either. But I have had been okay, I've got to leave the room. I can't watch this show.
Right.
But she has a line too there. I digress. I'm getting into my personal life. But seriously, you can imagine what an entire career that's both highly technical and also obsessed with the apocalypse. How is it going to come? How are we going to stop it? The different ways it might happen. I do feel like that's a lot of stress. I feel like that's a higher level of stress than one might think, especially for your whole entire career, constantly having meetings about how this might work and casualties and all that kinds of stuff. I think even the most hardened person after decades in a career like that might have some issues with the work they've been doing. Other people, no problem. They won't even think about it, which is sort of what you said earlier in the show. For me, though, Melissa Casillas might be the strongest, most inexplicable case for me of all of the 10 we're talking about right now, not including Amy Eskridge, who has come up this week. Mm-hmm. The reset phones are baffling to me. It feels a lot like a kidnapping. Mm-hmm. When you hear her job title, administrative worker, with regard to Melissa Casillas, you think, oh, why her? But if you understand how classified environments apparently operate, at least from what research I can tell, her disappearance could be the strangest one on the list, right? So, like, she works at Los Alamos. The scientists are usually siloed. A physicist working on a warhead trigger maybe only knows about the trigger, that's all they work on. But an administrative worker who's at a high level might see everything. They might manage schedules for lots of people, security access. I feel like in the intelligence world, she may have been a gold mine, and she connects to McCaslind. In her role at Los Alamos, she might have known all kinds of logistics and things that were connected to the private sector operations that he may have still been involved in. So to me, whoever wiped those phones might have known how valuable she was. But coming back to the crime show thing that's happening in my own house, which you just mentioned a few minutes ago. Thank you for a natural segue. A lot of times when a woman disappears, or most times, it's a man that's done it and someone they know, and it's a domestic issue. Right. So that's another thing. She's the one that, for me, feels like it really might point to something bigger. Like when I look at all 10 of these people, that's the one that I'm just like, this one feels super, super strange. And McCaslind is strange, and Resza are strange too. But Resza, I'm like, it is weird, but maybe she just fell a pretty good distance, and, you know, it's not a place they could easily get to or see. And so they haven't been able to recover her. She became injured. And with McCaslind, I do personally buy into the idea of having dealt with this myself, and, you know, aging relatives and getting older and all of those things, even though he didn't have any kind of cognitive decline. I buy into stress being a factor in whatever might have happened with him. But with her, something feels different to me about it. Whatever. I mean, I have the security clearance of a turnip. I don't know anything about this stuff, and I'm expecting lots of emails to come in from people. Or maybe if they're smart, they won't email us because they shouldn't tell us who they are or what they're doing. But, you know, as we said at the top of the show, this is all speculation, and we're outside of our depth here. What we really know about is Bigfoot.
Well, then we're in UFOs, a lot of good company.
I've given up on UFOs. I've fallen into the apathetic. There's so much noise. The signal ratio feels to me like it's getting narrower and narrower. And maybe this is all part of it. There's a lot of folks that think this is all about disclosure, that this is connected to just covering up imminent disclosure, which was the title of our own series on that many years ago. Maybe this is all just designed to slow that conversation down or redirect it in some kind of way. It's hard for me to say. But again, having looked at everyone and done this episode, for me, Casillas is at the top of the weirdness list, followed closely by McCaslind and Resza, who I think are both equally strange disappearances. Those three are real things that should be talked about for me. The other ones, I think, are just getting collected almost magnetically into the story.
Interesting. All right. Well, here are my loosely and unprofessional collected band of crap thoughts about all this for a very serious situation. I want to keep that in mind too, and remind folks that we're talking about people's lives and tragic endings and the families that have to endure after that, and it's horribly painful. Especially,
I think that gets lost in a lot of these like tabloid articles. And, like, it's just people forget that there's human beings wrapped up in all of this.
That's a thing. Whether you took your own life or you're just missing, there's no answers. You know, that closure is really hard to live without, of just like what happened, and part of the grieving and moving on process. It's horrible. So what I would like to do before I give my closing thoughts here, I think at this point, it's probably too early, and we'll probably never know all the details if that's the case of anything mundane. And sometimes that's all there is. I
Yeah.
often look at things that spiral out of control. Once again, I'm going to mention Mammoth and Homicide, the movie, where a whole case and all these conspiratorial kind of things happen and drag in Joe Mantegna, his character in there, gets a piece of evidence. It's just a piece of paper that says "Gro Faz," which could be a Hebrew term, which leads him on this path, and it's all misdirected. It spells out something else. Spoiler alert, it's a brand of pigeon feed called Grow Fast or Grow Faz. And so that's what it meant. He's just missing that critical piece, but it leads into this whole spiraling series of events, which are just misdirected. But
he thinks it's a clue, and it's just like a grocery list.
Yeah, the point, though, is that even though it was misdirected and a false lead, it shed light on this other real mystery and these other things going on, which were real. And he takes actions on that, and those are no less real and consequential. So is that what we're looking at here? So, and my overall view of this is looking at it in the mundane. There's two ways of strange, or two versions or flavors of strange. And one is that if this is mundane, meaning human caused, for some reason people had a plot. And again, it's going back to kind of like yes, yet again, another movie reference, Michael Clayton, where it's a corporate espionage kind of a thing. Some bad things, people do bad things, and they want to cover that up because Tom Wilkerson is blowing the whistle and he needs to be silenced. And because he's going to cause some corporation a lot of money if he continues on this path. And so you place a phone call, people go into action who are professionals. They handle this kind of thing for a lot of money, but they just make it go away, and they make him go away. And I don't doubt that exists. That's very strange. That doesn't happen every day. And people say like, well, that's not possible. Why not? Well, because I've never heard of it. The same thing we get about Bigfoot. Like Bigfoot doesn't exist. I've hunted all my life. I've never seen one. And that's a natural, logical conclusion, right? But is it the right one? Just because you've never seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So that's the type of strange in that, yeah, it's all human-based, and there's money, a lot of money involved with these materials and research. And we're talking about corporations that have a lot of, aerospace, whatever. They have a lot of money invested and stand to gain a lot of money, billions of dollars with this technology. And they want to protect it. And they want to steer this because they have the means and the money to do that. And there's people willing to, private factions that will carry this out. And so you look at these things, yeah, it's not mundane in that we don't hear about these things. People doubt they exist. I personally think it's possible. I don't know anything about it. Don't put me on any list, but that's mundane. You know what I'm saying? It's other humans. Or is it something, the other part of weird, is it paranormal in some way? Are there forces acting that go beyond, like I said, a disappearance where you can disappear somebody with zero evidence or trace? And that doesn't seem natural. That doesn't clock. That does not track. It's like, okay, there's 3 people out on this trail. The one target must be eliminated. We're out in the woods. Nobody's going to see this, but there's 2 other witnesses. They also must go away.
Right.
That's just people. Surprising. That's an ambush or whatever, or something made to look like an accident.
That's the other thing about Resza. Why do that with the other people so close by and risk discovery?
Exactly, because then you have to get rid of them, and it's not that much more work. Maybe you charge a little more for that, but that was the case. That's what happened, and then there's no witnesses to say anything weird about anything.
Right.
And so again, that's very strange, and it's like it's conspiratorial still, and it's movie stuff. But does that happen? I believe strange things have happened that are not mundane in any way by natural workings and conspiracies. People do things because they have the means and the motivations, and by us it seems strange, like maybe a conspiracy, but it's just a plan. And what happens is not a coincidence. It was meant to happen that way. So that's my take on it, but it's kind of curious. And so reeling this back, other strange disappearances and deaths have happened that don't track with anything kind of normal. A couple of mentions, especially with UFOs. One was UFO researcher Max Spears. I'm sure you heard about this. He was 39 years old. He was also labeled a conspiracy theorist. He died in Poland, I think July 16th, 2016.
Yeah, I
And
remember
he had a
this.
very strange death in that what the people there claimed is that, he was deep into some research.
Mhm.
It's very mysterious because he apparently vomited about 2 liters of some kind of black liquid while he was sitting on the couch just before he died. Okay, blood turns black, but like usually with folks that have expired for a while.
Right,
And so he sent a text before his death to his mother, I think. Her name was Vanessa Bates, saying, "Your boy's in trouble. If anything happens to me, investigate."
Mhm.
Did he send that or someone else try to watch over him do that? There was no initial autopsy, even though he vomited 2 liters of black fluid of unknown origin. The Polish
Right.
authorities ruled it as a natural cause death. No post-mortem, and that fuels, again, conspiracy theories of a cover-up. And he's in this field. And so, again, odd with the fluid, and nobody ever goes to investigate what the black goo was. Some mundane theories, drug overdose with pneumonia, maybe that can happen, causing some kind of drug toxicity. There was some potentially fatal levels of oxycodone in his system with a normal dose of Xanax in his system. Some experts in the medical field that the black fluid was just dark gastric fluid or coffee ground vomit, which they call it, in some cases of internal bleeding. But those are people looking at it after the fact, right?
Right.
And so it's like
Yeah.
those chat shows you see where they bring in a medical expert. It's like they have to state, well, I'm not his doctor or her doctor. I'm just diagnosing this from what I read in a thing. So don't, this is my opinion. Don't take this for fact or official diagnosis, which is what we're seeing here. Another one, which you and I were interested in a bit, was the investigative journalist Michael Hastings, I think his name was. He dies in a car accident on June 18th, 2013 in LA, Los Angeles. He was working on this Rolling Stone piece on a profile of General Stanley McChrystal, titled presumably The Runaway General. And the angle on it was that this article was going to characterize McChrystal and his staff as mocking senior Obama officials. And then that led to his resignation. But here's the weird part. I think, there's some strange stories about it, but he was kind of wigging out and claiming all kinds of things. The journalist Michael Hastings, before he died, saying people were following him. Maybe it was drug-fueled paranoia, this or that, but he claimed that he was in trouble. And he was driving his Mercedes-Benz C250. He's only 33. And so did he take his own life? Well, he apparently crashes his car at a high speed, which bursts into flames. And you can see some of that in some security camera footage from like one of the local businesses, like a gas station or something, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So you see the explosion happen, but he said that people were out to kill him. And then this happens. And that is a little Michael Clayton-ish. So
yeah, sure.
played by George Clooney. I have no information on whether that actually was a conspiracy. What I think about it is purely that I don't know either way if it was just he just crashed because he was on a bender for a week and, he just lost control, or somebody planted a bomb. But I do believe it's possible. You know what I'm saying? I think there's a lot of course, conspiracies out there like that. And there's, mundane explanations for what happened. That's the way it's supposed to come out, in that, it's a little weird we had to do this, but it can be explained away. That's the goal you want. You have some kind of possible mundane explanation. So there's been other strange cases. Now, he wasn't currently working on UFOs, but the other guy was. So backing out, as you say, like the 10,000-foot view, is more questions about, one, do things like this happen? Is that possible? Because, again, other people who are pretty skeptical of this stuff, like, that doesn't happen. That's just in the movies. There's no conspiracies, there's no hit squads, there's no assassins. That doesn't really happen. And I think if you do some research on people who, or semi whistleblowers, like John Kiriakou, who's all over the feeds, talking about what the CIA does, and he goes, "Oh yeah, no, there's hit squads, there's people, there are assassins. That really happens." Every week they go over a list and they decide who's troublesome in the world, and they send a guy on a plane and he just shows up and he uses, it's like old school analog. He just uses the materials he finds at his location, does the deed, gets on a plane. And he said that happens all the time. That's why some of these novelists write this into their novels, because they're taking it from things they heard which really happened. So again, is that possible? I believe it is possible. Is that what's happening here? Like I said, I don't think that we have enough information at this point to look at each case individually, but we do know weird things that are fact about these, or what's reported fact. It makes you question, and I can see why you lump this together, and that makes sense to me. Why not look at all these then? Yeah. And then how far does it have to go back? Is that, well, as we got our research, like, we can't really include this one because this was before 2023 or 22, and so does it fit? It's like, is there a limit on that? In the angle of this being possible or not, I don't think there's a time limit. I think as soon as there's been the very first conspiracies that happened were because people had a vested interest in keeping something or someone quiet. That's just how humans operate. Like, we can do this, we can get away with it, and we did it. Second is, what's the probability, as we talked about earlier then? Okay, so then you have all these strange kind of things, and is that kind of thing within the realm of probabilities? Like we said, the percentages, like at Marconi, it's like, well, how much is too many? If you know what I'm saying. Like, okay, so we have 10 to 12 scientists so far in related fields, and under the genre of UAP or that kind of phenomenon and strange space materials. 10 to 12 people start raising questions, as they have done. But if you personally doubt this, then what is your number? What if 25 scientists suddenly have strange disappearances or deaths? Okay, maybe you consider it a little bit more. What about 50 scientists? What about ones there might be some you don't hear about yet, or are discarded because it doesn't fit the parameters of grouping this together. You know what I'm saying? So even people that we know that have even written about this is like, there's nothing to see here, folks. This is just, random stuff. Totally random. But yeah, it's weird and strange. We should investigate, but totally random. What is their number of like, that's too many? And it's like, there's got to be something to this. You know what I'm saying? There's a psychological part where the probability doesn't make sense. And there's a mathematical portion of that where like, yeah, this is way outside the range of randomness. This usually doesn't occur in 100% of cases. There's something else going on. The probability is such that it's seeming less random. Although some of the cases, as you said, I agree with you, might be unrelated. But there's enough weirdness there that it seems like there's some there. And it should be investigated just in general. But is this connected? Well, possibly. But I do think it's possible. I think the probability of this being random is shrinking. And then we're getting more information all the time. So I want to reserve judgment. Just quickly on the case of one of the later ones, which is Amy Eskridge. And we did mention her at the top of the show. And her father saying, like, please stop with this. And I get that. It's just like, stop speculating. We don't know. There's nothing suspicious about this. It's just a tragic thing. We're trying to deal with it as a family.
Yeah, but he's a NASA engineer, by the way.
Right? Yeah, and so he's saying that. And then, of course, you'd have conspiracy theorists saying, like, well, that's exactly what he would say if he's being pressured to sweep this under the rug. It's just this endless loop game you can play. Well, of course he's going to say that. Or maybe it's true that he is being pressured somehow. Somebody we know is a good close friend that we trust was talking about somebody else they knew talking about something sensitive and was making a post on Facebook. And they claimed, again, I can't vouch for any of this, but I believe our friend who believes his friend, that as he was typing this response out in Facebook, some thread, that the text was disappearing. Mm-hmm. What he found out later was that, yes, they had hacked into his computer. They were monitoring what he was saying online, and they just got rid of it. And he was told, in no uncertain terms, knock it off, or you're going to have even more serious consequences. And we are watching you. Now, is that possible? Well, yeah, it's not that hard. Teenagers overseas are probably able to do this, or even here. Right. But people are watched, I believe, and they are monitored. And when you say something they don't want you to, there are repercussions. And to achieve this, they have high-tech means, directed energy particle weapons, microwaves, essentially. And is that real? I believe so. I believe it's already been used, and it comes off as a mystery, even mocked by our own intelligence services. Like, that doesn't exist. I'm talking about Havana syndrome. Well, there you go. That was a 60 minutes profile on that, which is very interesting. Not about any of this stuff because the people didn't die, but they suffered horrible effects from it, long-lasting, lingering health effects. So, yeah, it's not out of the realm, although unlikely in many cases, but in this case, possible. That's where I'm going to leave this. So in summation, my thinking on all this is that too early to really start putting pieces together as far as a criminal case, as far as we know. So there's only speculation, but is it possible? I believe so. In general, has it been done before? I believe so.
Well, folks, whether you walk away from this episode believing that these vanishing scientists and researchers are the victims of a highly sophisticated cover-up, or you think this is the tragic inevitable result of psychological stress, the underlying truth is equally chilling. I think the most heartbreaking part of all these grand sweeping internet theories is that the noise completely drowns out the very real, very quiet human tragedy at the center of it all. There are families out there tonight who aren't looking for a spy thriller. They aren't looking for an international espionage ring or a UFO mothership. They're just looking for their husbands, their wives, and their parents.
We want to thank you for joining us on this cursory investigation into these officers, scientists, and researchers. And please remember to check in on the people you love. Good night.
That's going to wrap up episode 329 of Astonishing Legends. We're dark next week, but we'll be back the week after that with a new show. In the meanwhile, look for new episodes of the Dead Letter Office weekly on Tuesdays, and keep an eye on our Patreon for early and commercial-free versions of all of our shows and more.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound. Our co-producer is Tess Feifel, who also leads our research efforts and manages our social media. And we're grateful for the hard work of our technical producer, Ed Vicola, behind the scenes. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland, for lending his voice to our shows.
Hi, I'm Becca Blakely, and I give permission to Astonishing Legends.
I understand this is with no implied promise of present or future compensation.
Galaxy-wide in perpetuity, however they see fit.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Many episodes have transcripts available. For ones that don't, you can request them by emailing transcripts@astonishinglegends.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Discord, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to commercial-free versions of both the main show and the Dead Letter Office, as well as additional bonus content, including the Patreon-exclusive show, The Astonishing Junk Drawer. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.